Goodbye.
He's going through the bump.
There he goes, through the gate.
That's good.
In 2009, Council began research and consultation to identify the key challenges in sport for women and girls within Moreland.
The review identified several issues.
There was a serious lack of female competition and teams.
Only 8% of participants using council sports grounds were female.
To address this inequality, Council introduced a policy to encourage clubs to be more inclusive of women, juniors, people with a disability and people from culturally diverse communities, or risk losing an allocation of a ground to a club that is being inclusive.
Female participation has now increased by 161% in Moreland.
West Merri-bek Football Club is proud to align with Moreland's policy.
This year we successfully launched the club's first ever under-12 girls footy team.
We're changing our club.
We're changing our culture.
I'm changing the game.
So I'm Claire Johnston and I'm an accredited cricket bat maker and the first female in the world. I learnt how to make cricket bats from Ian Cullen. There's a lot of bats out there for men and I felt that there was an opportunity there to actually work with women to make better bats and to actually make them for their style. So recently I was commissioned to make 5 cricket bats for the Pascoe Vale Headfield Cricket Club for their under-13s girls cricket team. And to see their faces when they were given the cricket bats was just brilliant. So what I'd really love to be able to do is to keep working with my local community, the local cricket clubs, particularly the women, and work to make great cricket bats.
My name's Leslie. I have been with Moreland Family Daycare as an educator for over 36 years, I think. Family Daycare is a wonderful organisation. We look after children in our own home, they blend in with the family, and it's fantastic.
I love Family Daycare.
I can choose my own hours, very flexible. I've made wonderful friendships with lots of the families. I'm now looking after children of the children I used to care for. The children just growing and developing is a wonderful, wonderful experience for me every day. I'd recommend Family Daycare to anybody and everybody.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's John Kavanagh and I'm the chairperson of this meeting, the Planning and Related Matters meeting. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's meeting. Our meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and elders from other communities who might be with us this evening. I acknowledge that many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have made Moreland home and in doing so have contributed to the rich diversity of this municipality. Members of the gallery, please note that the Planning and Related Matters meeting is being recorded and web streamed live to Council's website and Facebook. This recording will be available as video on demand. Gallery attendees are advised that they will be recorded during the meeting. Councillors, a reminder that in line with the adopted councillor conduct principles as outlined in the Councillor Code of Conduct, councillors should ensure that they conduct themselves in the meeting with integrity, impartially exercise their responsibilities in the interests of the local community and not properly seek to confer or advantage any person. This behaviour will support the principles of leadership and good governance and secures public confidence in the office of councillor. Members of the gallery, in the event of an emergency or disruption, we may be required to ensure the safety of attendees. Please follow any directions of council staff. Thank you for your understanding. Just before I go through the officers, the councillors in attendance, I do want to make mention of the death a couple of days ago of David Malloy from Malloy's Shoes. He's been there for over 60 years in business on the corner of Melville Road and Bell Street. And I attended his funeral yesterday. Wouldn't normally make such an announcement. They were Pascoe Vale icons, though, his whole family. And it was one thing at the funeral that was really wonderful was to see so many people from Pascoe Vale and Pascoe Vale South. I think everyone that's ever walked into that shop has been treated with the ultimate respect and decency. And I assure you, he sadly missed David Malloy and valet to him. And we are thinking of his family tonight. Thank you for that, councillors. Currently in attendance, we have Councillor and Olivia Carley-Hannon. We have Councillor Helen Davidson. Hello. We have the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Natalie Abood. We have Councillor Dale Martin. We have Councillor Mark Riley, Councillor Lambros Tapanos, and Councillor Oscar Yildiz. I have received a message from Councillor Ali Farnley. He will be here shortly, but he's stuck in traffic at the moment. Has anyone had any other apologies from any other councillors? Anyone heard from? No one's heard from Councillor Bolton? Okay. All right. Officers in attendance tonight. We have the Group Manager of City Development, Philip Priest, to my left. We have the Unit Manager of Urban Planning, Narelle Jennings. We have Saskia Hunter, who's the Governance Officer, Unit Manager of Governance, Sally Curran, and Mark Hughes, who's Planning Coordinator. And Robert Shatford, I think he's also here as Planning Coordinator. Adoption of the minutes of the, so there are no apologies at the moment, am I correct? Yep. All right, adoption of the minutes. Could I have a motion for the adoption of the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of September 2018? Councillor Yildiz moving that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Carley-Hannon. Any discussion on that? Being no discussion, put that to the vote. All in favour? Against? Declare that carried. I'm calling for conflicts of interest, and in calling for conflicts of interest, I'd like to declare one. I'd like to declare a conflict of interest on DED 6718, which is the application for 36 Gladstone Parade, Glenroy, planning permit application. My son and his girlfriend live directly across the road from that application, and so therefore I feel as if I am conflicted and unable to vote on that application. So at that point I will leave the chambers, and with your permission, councillors, the Deputy Mayor will take over. Councillor Yildiz.
I also want to declare a conflict of interest on DED 6618. The company that I currently work full-time for has a relationship with that site. Okay, thank you, councillor. They noted? Yep. Okay, great. All right. Any other councillors? Okay, I'll give you an outline as to how the planning and related matters meeting will take place this evening. The relevant officer will introduce the report and the officer's recommendation. I'll then give objectors the opportunity to move to the lectern and to make their submission. After this time, the applicant will be given the opportunity to speak. If you are making a submission, please clearly state your name and your street for the record. You are requested to present viewpoints clearly and concisely as why you support or oppose the application. So we've got. Please don't repeat what earlier speakers have said if possible. If you're opposed to a planning application, it would be good to inform the meeting why you're opposed and suggest an alternative approach that may satisfy your concerns. Please note there'll be a limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, and I'll ring a bell with about 15 seconds to go. As a chairperson, I do, however, reserve the right to increase or reduce available time. So, presentation of reports. The first one, so that's the first one, so you may make your way out, councillor. So the first one is DED 6618, 301 to 303 Bell Street, Coburg, planning application MPS 2017-720. Could I move to the officer to present their report? Thank you, officer. Narelle.
Thank you, councillors and members of the gallery. This is an application at 301 to 303 Bell Street in Coburg. On the screen is a map showing the subject site and the zoning provisions that apply to the site. The site's in a residential growth zone and is affected by a number of overlays. It's just a photo of the subject site showing the existing conditions. The BP service station. That's an aerial photo up on your screen now, showing the context of the subject site. To the south of Bell Street, there are a few commercial properties along Bell Street, but largely a residential area. There's more commercial properties on the north side of Bell Street, including a McDonald's and another service station diagonally opposite. So this application proposes the demolition of all buildings on the site and construction of new buildings to allow the continuation of the existing service station use. The service station currently has permission to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it is proposed that that use continue in that way. There'll be a new fuel canopy and fuel dispensers, as well as removal of existing underground tanks and installation of new ones. There are new advertising signs proposed on the new buildings. The existing pole sign at the front of the site is being retained. 9 car parking spaces and 3 bicycle parking spaces are proposed, and there's alteration of the existing access ways on Bell Street also proposed. That's an aerial of the existing conditions of the site. The blue highlighted area is the existing building. There's an existing car wash on the site that is proposed to be removed altogether. The proposed site layout shows that the new building will be in a different location. So it will have a north-south orientation along the eastern side of the site, and then the fuel canopies in front of that new building. That plan just shows a bit of detail of the internal layout of the proposed new building. So it's a BP shop, as well as a convenience shop to buy food and other convenience items. Proposed elevations up on the screen. So the top elevation shows the front elevation of the proposed building. The bottom elevation depicts the proposed buildings as you'd see them from the residential properties to the south. There was public notice of the application and we received 48 objections. The main issues are listed up on the screen. There was a planning information and discussion meeting held back in May. Following that, to address some of the main concerns raised, the application was formally amended, and in those amendments, a takeaway food premises was removed from the proposal. The building was set back a further 3 metres from the south boundary, so increased to 6 metres, allowing for an increased landscaping strip of 3 metres along that boundary. What that amended application also did is modify the proposed access to Rose Street, removing an existing crossover and modifying the other to encourage right turn exits from the site onto Rose Street. So the key planning considerations have been whether the uses are appropriate for the site, the location of the new buildings, traffic movements to and from the site, and protecting the amenity of residential properties abutting the site. So the report before you tonight recommends that the application be supported, and there are a number of key conditions in that report and recommendation, including a requirement for a landscape plan, requirement for a lighting report, control of noise through implementing an acoustic report, and confirmation of commitments made in the sustainable management plan.
Thank you, Narelle. Are there any objectors who wish to speak? Yes, please. Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Sanders. I'm here with my husband, Mark Sanders, and we live on Rose Street in Coburg, very, very close to the subject site, so close that we see it every morning, every day. We are members of the group of over 40 objectors to the original application, and we also attended the PID meeting held here on the 24th of May this year. We have awaited with interest the outcome of that meeting and were pleased to receive notice of this committee and receipt of the Council Officer's report, recommendations and conditions. We note the gazetting of Planning Scheme Amendment VC 148 in July this year, deleting clause 52.12 from the planning scheme, which had some bearing on part of our objection to the proposed new layout. We are pleased to read that the following changes have been made to the original application, which goes some way to resolving some of our objections, namely deletion of the takeaway food outlet, reduction in size of the retail outlet, doubling of the buffer zone along the southern boundary, increase in height of the fence along the southern boundary, the southern boundary fence being an acoustic fence, permanent removal of the current southernmost crossing from the site onto Rose Street, commitment to encourage traffic exiting onto Rose Street to turn right towards Bell Street in an effort to restrict traffic heading south down Rose Street. Finally, deletion of the illuminated BP badge originally intended for the southern end of the new canopy. We note the Planning Officer's recommendation to give notice to grant a planning permit subject to Council's conditions being met. As stated at the PID meeting, we continue to support the upgrade to the site in principle as it is unsightly and in a sorry state of repair. We are also pleased to see the removal of the car wash facility as it is extremely noisy, generates a huge amount of litter, huge amount of traffic, illegal parking and is a nuisance. However, we continue to have concerns with the following items. Number one, traffic exiting onto Rose Street having to turn right towards Bell Street. We note that a right turn instruction sign will be installed. We ask that the left side curb as you exit the site and are asked to turn right towards Bell Street be engineered in such a way so as to make it very difficult for a vehicle to physically turn left down Rose Street. That's just some kind of raised curb, or fit some kind of bollard or post to the same effect. We have seen attempts at nearby junctions to enforce one-way turning, for example, at the junction from Brearley Parade onto Melville Road and Prince's Terrace onto Melville Road using only a sign, and have many times witnessed vehicles being driven over curbs and not obeying the signs. Number two, proximity of the canopy to the southern boundary. We note that the canopy still extends, as far as we can tell on the plans, to the northern edge of the landscape buffer, and are still of the opinion that given its size and height, it is too close to the southern boundary. We note the recommendation that ample vegetation is planted to mask it, but we do not think that that will solve the problem. We request that the canopy be shortened. Finally, number three, light pollution and glare from the underside of the canopy and bowsers. As the amended plans still show the bowsers and canopy being on the western side of the site, we still hold major concerns over the increasing glare and light spill affecting those of us who live very close to the site. We ask that the following conditions be included. Mature trees of a height to match the canopy are planted in the western nature strip to prevent light spill outside the property from the canopy. Shrubs of an appropriate height are planted in the western nature strip to prevent light spill outside the property from the bowsers. And finally, fit some kind of screens to the underside of the southern end of the canopy that will have the effect of bouncing light back into the site and not allowing it to escape into Rose Street. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Just before I call for the next one, we've had two councillors arrive, Councillor Alia Farnley and Councillor Sue Bolton. I believe traffic's been very difficult. Thank you for your attendance. Any other objectors that would like to speak? Okay. All right. Is the applicant here or representative of the applicant? Please.
Councillors. We're very pleased and...
So your name, sir?
My name is Lucas Paterno.
Lucas, thank you. And you're the planning consultant, are you?
I am a planning consultant from URPS.
Yes. Thanks.
We are very relieved and pleased that the efforts that we've gone through to date have been appreciated by all the objectors. This application has been with Council for just over a year. It's gone through a number of amendments, and the most recent and significant one was a result of the PID meeting, which included all of those amendments that have been summarised in the report. I guess I will speak to the concerns that remain on behalf of the objectors. On the application plans, we have proposed to modify the Rose Street crossover in such a way that it directs cars to turn right onto Bell Street. And we would say that we would be able to provide any type of design that would be in accordance with the Moreland Council road engineers in order to have a safe egress from the site. In relation to the canopy and its proximity to the southern boundary, You might want to bring up the elevation, if that's possible. So in elevation, which is the bottom drawing, southern elevation, the canopy at its highest point is 6.42 metres high. We're in a residential zone. If this was a residential building and it was assessed under Res Code, it would require a setback of 1.86 metres from the shared boundary. But we are proposing for that canopy to be 3 metres from the boundary. So it would be in excess of a Res Code requirement. In relation to the lighting, there is already a condition which has been recommended by the officer, and it's to provide an additional report to ensure that lighting does not unreasonably affect the amenity of the property to the south. Typically with these types of commercial applications, we would expect that any lighting on the site would be baffled to ensure that minimal, if any, lighting projects outside of the site.
Thank you. Just before you go, are there any questions of the applicant? Councillor Davidson.
It may be a question for officers, and it was just in relation to what Sarah pointed out. In relation to the planting of trees on the nature strip, is that something that council would manage, or is that something that the applicant could help with? The shrubs on the western strip as well? Is that something that council organises or that the applicant does?
Through the Mayor, conditions regarding street tree planting are quite commonly included as conditions of the planning permit, whereby it would be the responsibility of the permit applicant, but then ultimately council's responsibility to maintain those plantings after they're planted.
Okay, so then my question goes to the applicant. Is that something you could consider in relation to the mature trees being planted on the nature strip?
Well, we would say that the lighting itself would be installed in such a way that would mitigate any type of...
I think the objector was more concerned about the car lights, I think.
About the car lights?
Yeah, was that right or not?
Not the car lights.
Not car lights, I'm sorry.
What we're most concerned about is the light coming down from the underside of the canopy.
Yes, okay.
The bouses and that spreading out.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
The bouses themselves are likely to be
lit as well.
Shine directly out.
Okay, right,
and
okay.
Say the car lights, headlights shine.
Yes, okay, all right. Thank you. So your response, sir?
Oh yes, so I was responding to the objector's concern in relation to the lights from the canopy and from the bouses. And they'd be installed in such a way that that the light source is pointed towards the site and not affect any part of the land outside of the site.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you very much. Councillors, any other questions for officers? Yes, Councillor Boo.
Yes, sorry, Sid. I just had a question about, probably for officers, about the design of the exit out of the...
Rose Street.
Onto Rose Street, yeah, thank you, Mark. That turns right. Like, do we see that there's a way that we could be involved or advise a design that would make it very hard for cars to turn left onto Rose Street?
Through the Mayor, it's possible that we could amend the conditions in the recommendation to require some additional consideration that's to council's engineering standards, but I couldn't tell you on the spot what that might end up being, so whether it's sort of raised curve on that edge, I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you, Nora. All right. Do I have a mover of any, have a motion at all? You're moving the officer recommendation?
Yeah.
Or, right, so Councillor Abood moving the officer recommendation, Councillor Davidson seconding. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Abood?
Yeah, I guess I can. So I suppose we've shown that none of us will jump to the opportunity to put forward a proposal like this. But I think it's worth acknowledging, and the reason that I'm happy to do so is that there is a service station there. I do believe that a substantial amount of the issues that were raised about the application have been suitably addressed, specifically with regard to knocking out the noisiest part of the current establishment, which is the car wash, and also directing the traffic so that it can only turn right, which isn't the case now. You know, there were some concerns about the site having 24-hour operation, but when I read through the report, I noticed that was approved in 1999. So it's kind of quite obvious that this has been a servo for a very long time. And I suspect, personally, I feel like some of the detail about the new design is really upgrading the site as it stands now. And so I do feel quite confident that it will turn into a scenario where there are mostly right-hand turns, and of course there are people who will always break rules, and there will be the occasional left-hand turn onto Rose Street, same as people turn into Gaffney Street and out of Gaffney Street, Bunnings where they shouldn't. So yeah, with regret, I am happy to put the officer's recommendation on this one, and I do respect the huge amount of work that's gone into it from the perspective of the residents, but also the officers and the applicants, just to come to a better outcome, and also to acknowledge that it is better than what exists currently. So.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Davidson, did you wish to speak to it?
No, nothing further to add. Councillor Abood covered my sentiments.
Thank you. Any other councillors like to speak to it? Councillor Bolton.
While I recognise there have been some amendments to the plans to alleviate some of the concerns of residents, I'm actually going to vote against this proposal because I feel that we don't need another fast food outlet in this particular area. We've already got 2 fast food outlets on the other corners. I know that might create the idea of a precedent that it should be a fait accompli, that there should be another fast food outlet. But I feel that residents in this area are coping with, you know, a lot of problems as a result of the fast food outlets that already exist there in terms of rubbish floating down various streets, the inadequacy of being able to enforce litter patrols and so forth. I think those issues, you know, I just wouldn't like to vote to add to those issues. I recognise there have been some efforts to deal with lighting and so forth, but I sort of don't really believe they've gone quite far enough, so I'll be voting against.
Okay, Councillor, thank you. Any other speakers? Being no further speakers. You are, as one spoken against, you may, yes.
I just want to clarify that there, within the report, I've determined that there isn't a fast food outlet on the premises currently.
No, it's been removed.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
that was negotiated.
just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Okay, thank you, councillors. Now we're going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Do I need a motion to move the chair? Have the chair? Okay. Now we move on to the next item, which I've declared a conflict of interest on. So I'll leave. I'm sorry. Next steps. Sorry. Next steps. Thank you. I do that every night.
Thank you, councillors. Council has determined to support the application. A notice of decision will be issued to all objected parties. Objectors will have 28 days in which to lodge an appeal against that decision, and the applicant will have 60 days in which to appeal any conditions of the approval. Thank you.
Thank you. I've declared a conflict of interest on the next item, so I'll wait.
Just waiting for Councillor Yildiz to return to the chamber. The next item on the agenda is DED 6718, 36 Gladstone Parade, Glenroy, planning permit application MPS 2018-310, D18-288985. And I'll move to the officer to present the report.
Thank you, councillors and members of the gallery. The second item for this evening is an application at 36 Gladstone Parade in Glenroy. It involves the construction of 4 double-storey dwellings. The site is located in an area that's been fairly intensely developed over the recent years. As you can see on the screen, it's one of the last remaining undeveloped sites. Surrounding land is predominantly developed by double-storey dwellings. There are some single-storey dwellings, including the immediate west of the subject site. The subject land is about 1,011 square metres in area, and it's fairly flat. Existing dwelling on the site is a single-storey dwelling. It has a large tree in its front yard with a 1.6 metre high fence screening it. As you can see on the photos, that's the prevailing streetscape. So generous setbacks, predominantly 2-storey development. In terms of the proposal, what we have, as I mentioned, councillors, 4 double-storey dwellings. 3 of them are 3 bedrooms, 1 is 4 bedrooms. We have a driveway going through the centre of the site. Each dwelling meets the requirements of the planning scheme in regards to car parking. There's no requirement under the planning scheme for a visitor car parking space on the site. There's generous areas of secluded open space. So each dwelling ranges between 42 and 73 square metres of secluded open space. As you can see on the screen there, again the floor, ground floor and first floor plans. Proposed streetscape. The proposed streetscape presents somewhat awkwardly, and part of that is in relation to the shadowing impacts of the development. As I mentioned earlier, it's a fairly intensely developed area. Adjoining units have smaller secluded open space areas. The planning scheme puts limitations on the extent of open space that can be shadowed by development. So this is part of the design response to minimise the extent of shadow cast over the proposed development. Through the consultation process, we had 15 objections, and overshadowing was one of the key issues. Overlooking, noise, traffic and car parking were also issues. As a result of the consultation process, the applicant provided some substituted plans or some amended plans which reduced the shadowing further. As part of the officer's recommendation to council, we're suggesting some further changes. What I'd like to do, councillors, is take you through again the advertised plan and then the discussion plan. So the discussion plan which followed after the consultation meeting. So it actually pushed the building back, and this is for dwelling 4. At the back of the site again you'll see increased setbacks for bedroom 1 and bedroom 2 of that dwelling. In terms of the shadow impact at 9 AM, as a result of the discussion plans, that is dwelling 1 over unit 7 and unit 8, 38 Gladstone Parade, so at the front of the site. Through condition 1A of the recommendation, councillors, what you'll see is essentially a reduction in the shadows. So in other words, the extent of shadow will be in line with the 2 bedrooms. At present, that additional shadow that you saw on the screen a moment ago was being cast by the bathroom and the walk-in road. In terms of the shadow over the adjoining unit 6 at the back of the site, so the shadow cast from dwelling 4 at 11 AM, that area marked in red is the extent of non-compliance under the planning scheme. So a limited area of non-compliance. Shadowing. As I mentioned, the recommendation is to support the proposal, and part of that includes an further increase in boundary setbacks.
Thank you. Are there any objectors or submitters who would like to speak to this application? Make your way to the podium.
My name is Patricia Gallagher and I currently reside at Unit 6, 38 Gladstone Parade, Glenroy. And this development will severely impinge on my natural light, air circulation. It's set very close to the fence line. I think it will impinge also on my privacy. And from what I can see, they're planning to put in shrubs or trees, as was stated on the plan, which will be very close to my boundary, which I'm worried that will undermine my garage and my unit. Getting back to the light, the natural light, that's the only side I can get natural light in. On the other side of my property, I share a party wall, so there is no other way for me to have natural light. And especially in the winter, I'm going to have to rely on electricity, probably all of my waking hours. So which means from early in the morning until late in the evening. Come summer, the air circulation, it's very hot on that side, and minimal air circulation, which then means that I'm more and more dependent on air conditioning and fans.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to add. I have been told that the roof line of the garages, which will share the dividing fence line, has been reduced. It will help to some extent minimise the shadowing, but not a great deal.
Yeah.
And as for the central driveway, trying to reduce the impact of the cars parked on the street. Gladstone Parade is almost wall-to-wall units, and at any given time, it's single-lane traffic through there. So it won't reduce the impact of street parking. In fact, it will probably increase.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about it.
Thank you very much for coming in. Are there any other objectors or submitters? Yep, come forward, please.
My name's Mark LaRosa. I'm here with my sister, Julie. We live directly behind this property. Our simple objection is that the first-storey windows look onto our backyard. That's the entire view is our backyard, our roof, our next-door neighbour on that side and that side. As we understand it, these windows will have screens across them, but we believe that the screens allow the occupants to still look through the slats that are there onto our backyard. At the same time, it obscures them from us, so we can be seen, but we can't see them. Now, they are bedrooms. Bedrooms are sometimes studies with desks at windows, so there may be someone there for a considerable amount of time. But we don't know. I mean, you know, we have no peace of mind and basically no privacy anymore. We do spend time in the backyard on our patio. I'm trying to establish a garden there at the back. So it's quite simple. yeah, we just miss out on any privacy. That's all.
Thank you. Are there any other objectors or submitters that would like to speak to this application? Sure, come forward.
Good evening. So I'm Daniel from Arcsine. We're the applicant. I won't rehash over what Robert has gone through. I guess just to mention that we're proposing 4 decent-sized family homes. It is over 1,000 square metres, and there's 4 double-storey dwellings being proposed at a sort of density of 1 per 250 roughly. So it's very much in keeping with what's going on in Gladstone Parade in general. It's obviously a desirable area close to the shops and transport. Although the choice of words of awkward might not be what I use, but it's an unusual design response because of the orientation of the site and also maintaining that large existing tree in the frontage. So we've chosen to put a driveway through the middle and put those dwellings either side. It gives better access to that northeast and northwest orientation that the site sort of tries to capture. In terms of neighbouring impacts, we have tried hard to give greater than standard setbacks, noting that on both sides of us, on both the long sides, there are a lot of small courtyards, a lot of other units with windows, so it's been tricky to get lots of res code compliance, which we have achieved, and we've gone extreme in some cases with, as you can see, dwelling number 1, the first floor is set back 4.5 metres, I think, roughly, and asking for more now to ensure that we're doing everything we can to stop unreasonable overshadowing. The back dwelling of number 4, also mindful of, I think it's Patricia's windows there and small sort of service area. So going through the conditions, condition 1A is a little tough, but we understand if that helps keep people a little happier, then we can achieve that and still ensure that the internal amenity of our dwellings are still there. In terms of overlooking at the rear, again, those screens are planning scheme compliant, allowing a quarter of transparency through, which means that, yes, people can see through, but it's a balance between privacy and some internal amenity and outlook for those people there. So, yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Great. Just stay there for a sec, Daniel. I'll just ask the councillors if they have any questions for the applicant or the officers. No? Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. So, councillors, if there are no further questions, or because there are no further questions, I'll ask please for a motion. Councillor Davidson?
Yes, I've got an alternate motion to the one that's proposed by officers. If we could pull that up, I'll wait for that to come up on the screen for the benefit of the audience and those live streaming at home. So I'll just go to the main change from the officer's recommendation. So that's through condition I and M. So it reads, a reduction in the southwest wall height of dwelling 1, the garage in dwelling 1, by 500 metres to reduce the shadow impact to 38 Gladstone Parade, and provisions of an accessibility ramp to the entrance of dwelling 1. So if I have a seconder, I'll speak to that. Thanks.
Councillor Martin?
Councillor Martin?
Just wanted to clarify that that's L. L and
Oh,
M.
sorry.
Yeah, just for the sake of procedure. Thank you.
So thank you to the objectors who came today and for the participation that you've had with the consultation meetings. I'd also like to thank the applicant who I think has worked well with council and worked well with the objectors to try to mitigate some of the effects, some of the negative effects that this dwelling would have on their amenity. In relation to the points that have been changed, I think that it comes to a fair balance for the applicant's dwelling to go ahead, and also coming to an effort to reduce the negative impacts on the amenity of the residents, particularly Patricia, who I know council officers have worked with. In relation to the overshadowing, it was in particular to 2 windows. One which was a habitable room that had previously 80% of it would have been cast in shadow. With this new recommendation, that is reduced to approximately 30%. So it's a much better outcome, and they've achieved that by reducing the height of the garage. Unfortunately, in relation to the second window that was in question for Patricia, it's not able to reduce the shadow impact. However, the shadow will have subsided almost completely by 11 a.m. So hopefully the warmth of the sun in the winter months will be able to compensate for the parts that you've lost. I'll pass over to Councillor Martin to speak in relation to the accessibility ramp and perhaps to add anything, but I'd just really like to also reconfirm that point about thanking all the objectors who have participated in this and the applicant who has made those concessions to enable us to get to this point where it's workable. And thanks for preserving the tree in the front as well.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. Councillor Martin?
Yeah, thank you. So I rise to second this amended motion. It is a real challenge that we have to face as councillors, and that is balancing that development is going to happen, but actually trying to work with developers to get as minimal impact on surrounding residents. And, you know, I acknowledge that you know, you could have some overlooking in that backyard, and we've done the best that we can within the scheme, within the powers that we have to minimise that. This amended motion will really change that shading and that shadowing, and try and reduce that impact as much as we can. And again, also thanking the applicant, working with council, working through the peer process to actually try and reduce the impact on the neighbouring residents. The second amendment is just a slight change to the front of dwelling 1, and that is to put in an accessibility ramp. One of the things that we have noticed in this city is that there's a lot of buildings that are being built that could be made accessible later on, and we have issues with people with disability trying to find rentals in our city, and you know, there's a chance that maybe these will all be owner occupiers, or maybe will be rented, and it is only a slight change to that entrance, to that porch, for that actually to be made accessible. And that's something that as a council group we really want to encourage developers to make at least 1 or 2 or all of their you know, houses and homes in these medium density zones to be accessible for people with disability. So hence why that last motion, and also as well for any other developers or draftspeople that are looking for design ideas and options. As a council, we have design advice sheets that we've put out at the moment. They're currently in draft form, but we're really trying to push that out to encourage good development that does have that minimal impact on surrounding residents. So I encourage anyone that may be watching that's interested in that stuff to look up our draft design advice sheets. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillors, are there any speakers that would like to speak against the motion? With that in mind, I'll put it to the vote. So all those in favour of Councillor Davidson's amended motion? Against? And I declare that carried. I'll now move to the officer to present the next steps.
Thank you, councillors. The council this evening have determined to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit subject to the alternative recommendation. The additional condition 1L and 1M was put forward by Councillor Davidson. As objectors, you'll receive a copy of the notice of decision. You'll have 60 days in which to lodge an appeal to VCAT. Likewise, the permit applicant will have an opportunity to appeal any conditions contained in the notice of decision. Thank you.
Thank you. If someone could please grab the mayor.
We move on now to DED 6818, 80 John Street, Brunswick East Development Plan. And I'll ask the officer to present their report.
Thank you, councillors. The third item for this evening is an application for a development plan at number 80 John Street in Brunswick East. You may recall, councillors, that this time last month we were sitting here talking about two other development plans in the precinct, one at 102 to 106 John Street, which is in the top left-hand corner of the site, marked red, and one at, I think it's 82 Albert Street, which is on the right-hand side. Obviously, from the site there, you can see it's at the bottom of the screen, marked purple. It currently contains a single dwelling and a large outbuilding in the rear yard. Subject site, as you can see on the screen there, the site has access to a laneway at the back. However, as part of the proposed development plan, vehicle access will be via the John Street frontage, purely because the laneway doesn't have sufficient width where it turns, so it's an L-shaped laneway. This is the second development plan for this site. The development plan was before council officers back in August 2017 and was refused. The applicant took that to VCAT and VCAT upheld council's decision. There was a number of concerns with the amount of detail that was put in the development plan and some areas that were missing. In terms of what's indicated in this development plan, it intends to facilitate a future planning application for a 3-storey development with potential for a rooftop deck. Part of the recommendation, councillors, is that the rooftop deck be deleted. It's too much detail. It doesn't need to be contained in the development plan, and that was part of the commentary from VCAT in 2017. As I mentioned, vehicle access from John Street. In the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see the development that's happening around the area. So that green corridor through the EBV site, that is public open space. The brown represents multi-storey residential and retail. And the yellow, I believe, is purely multi-level residential. In terms of the proposed building envelopes for the development plan, so there's an indicative access way shown on the northern side of the site. And then obviously first floor and second floor, fairly substantial footprints. There was public consultation as required by the development plan. Public consultation will not occur after a development plan is approved, so as part of the planning permit process. There were no objections or no submissions received as part of this process. In terms of the recommendation before council this evening, it's a recommendation to support the development plan as put forward to us by the applicant, obviously with some further modifications and clarifications. As I mentioned, we're trying to limit some of the detail because development plans don't need to have a lot of the detail comes out through the planning application process, not through the development plan. In terms of the building height, we're proposing maximum height of 11 metres. The applicant had said 10.94 or 10.49. That was to be consistent with the DDO. Some comments about the design commitments to the site, including a public areas plan and deleting reference to the width of the driveway. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you very much, Robert. Now, I don't think we have any objectors or submitters, but do we have anyone that did want to speak? As a representative of the applicant here, would you like to speak?
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak at tonight's meeting. My name is Meg Sweeney. I'm a planning consultant from Planning and Property Partners, representing the owner of the land and applicant in this matter. We were engaged earlier on this year to prepare the development plan application, and we've worked with council quite closely over the last several months to positively resolve the application and prepare the development plan that has a high level of compliance with the development plan requirements. In particular, the framework for the development plan application will provide a high level of ESD and accessibility initiatives, the details of which will be further refined at the planning permit application stage. It's important to note that the planning permit application is currently in with council at the moment and is under consideration. We're very pleased with the officer's recommendation to support the development plan and do not seek to address any of the changes sought, but simply seek to reinforce the positive resolution for the officer level recommendation.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions for the applicant or of the council officers? Okay, being no questions, do I have a motion? Councillor Riley, are you moving the officer recommendation, Councillor Riley? Good. Do I have a seconder to that? Councillor Carly Hannon. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Riley?
Just briefly, I'm quite supportive of the officer's motion, and I think the presentation by Mr Shatford and the proponent clarify many of the issues. There's one just very counterintuitive aspect to this, which is this is a development plan, it's not a planning permit, which seems to me to be kind of counterintuitive to most people's ways of thinking about planning. And the whole of this larger East Brunswick Village site is subject to development plans. We talked about this last month with the other two that have come in the earlier applications for the vast bulk of this site. I say it's counterintuitive because we've just approved an public engagement and community participation, maybe it's a community engagement and public consultation process at our council meeting a couple of weeks ago, and this seems to me to be somewhat counterintuitive. And so I'm looking forward to some clarification from our planning unit as to how we implement that under the guise of these types of processes, because it is, I think, subject to some confusion. I do think people have outlined it tonight, but in terms of the broader community kind of coming in at another later stage, they often get somewhat lost in the process. So I've said this before, and I just look forward to being really clear about it, that people need to be clear that there will be a permit coming, as has already been suggested. However, at that point, we have fewer obligations on us as a council to promote the engagement. So hopefully the engagement's happened now, because basically the horse has bolted or is about to bolt and I'm moving it. So it's a bit of a contradiction, but I hope people understand.
Understand. Councillor Carly Hannon, do you want to speak to it? Any other councillor like to speak to it? Being no further discussion, we're going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against, declare that carried. Officers, next step.
Thank you, councillors. The council have determined to issue approval of the development plan. As the permit applicant, you'll be notified of the approval of the development plan in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. We move on now to DED 6918, 200 to 216 Sydney Road, Coburg, MPS 2017 1029. Lachlan, would you like to speak to it when you get a chance? Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. This is an application at 200 to 216 Sydney Road in Coburg. The application is for an 8-storey mixed-use building, including 155 apartments and ground-level commercial spaces. There are also 12 2- and 3-storey townhouses above basement level car parking. The subject site is mostly in the activity centre zone Schedule 1, where there's a preferred 18-metre height control. The rear of the site is also in the general residential zone in Schedule 1, where there's a 3-storey apartment. There's some history to this site. So there's an existing planning permit for the construction of a 5-storey mixed-use building. That building was compliant with the ACZ1 preferred heights and was approved by council at its March 2016 UPC meeting. Just a bit of necessary background about why we're here tonight. For the current application, the plans were advertised in March and 23 objections were received. In June, there was a VCAT review lodged and 5 of those objectors became parties to the appeal. Following that, officers advised the parties that the application would have been refused if not for the review being lodged. And over 2 days of compulsory conference hearings, all parties reached in principle agreement based on without prejudice amended plans and agreed with permit conditions. Council must now advise VCAT whether it consents to issue the permit. And if Council does not consent, the matter will proceed to a merits hearing in November based on the advertised plans rather than the without prejudice plans being considered tonight. So the mediated proposal includes an 8-storey mixed-use building fronting Sydney Road, fronting Cash Street at the rear and also Rennie Street to the south, the 2- and 3-storey townhouses. In the southeast corner of the site, fronting Cash Street, is now proposed a pocket park, and there's a pedestrian link running through the site from Cash Street through to Sydney Road, and also an access out onto Rennie Street as well. This is the development as it would be viewed from Sydney Road. As you can see, there's a 3-storey street wall. The 3 levels above that is set back 7 metres from the street in accordance with the ACZ. The next level up is set back further again at approximately 9 metres. And then the top level, which is not visible in this image, is set back further again at approximately 13 metres. That level will not generally be visible from Sydney Road because of those setbacks. As mentioned before, there's a pedestrian link through the site. This is the pedestrian link from Sydney Road. That's it sort of from within the site itself. There's a condition included in the recommendation that requires 24-hour public access to that pedestrian link. That condition also requires 24-hour public access to the pocket park fronting Cash Street as well. In terms of the key changes between the advertised plans and the plans being considered tonight, the without prejudice plan, key changes are firstly, there's significant increases in the setbacks from the southern boundary across all levels of the building. Those setbacks now exceed the setbacks that are still applied to the ACZ. And one of the townhouses has been deleted to allow for the creation of that pocket park fronting Cash Street as well. There's a range of other improvements. There's an improved ESD response, additional deep soil planting areas, a more excessive appearance to the top level of the Cash Street townhouses, additional pedestrian access from Rennie Street, compliance with a number of quality gate standards that were not previously met, and also a permit condition to apply to install a traffic calming device in Cash Street. Key planning considerations are the height of the development, the impact on the adjoining residential properties outside of the activity centre, and internal amenity of the development. It's recommended that Council's submission to VCAT be that it consents to the mediated proposal subject to the recommended conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Do we have any objectors or submitters here tonight? Yes, again, would you like to?
Nick Dolby, Holbrook Crescent, West Brunswick. A couple of issues on this site. It is the WE Cash site, an iconic site on Sydney Road for businesses, running a plumbing business. He was also a Coburg councillor, and I believe a mayor as well. Yep. So it's regrettable that the building does not in any way reflect the history of the site or the name associated with the site. The plan also has the officer's recommendation says 24-hour access on the pedestrian route. I commend the officers and the applicant on the development of the pedestrian route and the pocket park. However, the amended plans presented to the public actually show that this pedestrian route has gates that will be closed after hours, to quote from the amended plan. After hours gate line. So I suggest that we amend that. It's just that I've experienced this before where councillors asked for 24-hour for pedestrian access. Things like the Donaghy's Ropeworks in Tinning Street, Coburg, the former Donaghy's Ropeworks in Tinning Street, Coburg. The development at the bottom of Moore Street, I think it's Moore Street, behind Campbell Reserve, behind the Red Robin complex. Again, they have locked gates for what should be a public street. They are in fact turning it into a gated community. And so I'm asking that we have a look at this gate provision, that yes, the 24-hour access is enforced, not just as part of the plans. I'm also asking that lighting in the undercover areas be 24-hour and that signage be provided either by the applicant or by council, showing that there is in fact a publicly accessible pedestrian route through this site. It's one thing to have a vague entranceway that may be an entranceway to a residential development. It's another thing to actually say, look people, if you want to, you can walk through here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Would you like to go, sir?
I'm Tony Stewart. I live at number 1 Cash Street. Polly, my partner, and I are long-term residents living directly adjacent to 216 Sydney Road. We have spent many hours studying the proposals for this large development site. We, as architects, have invested over 200 hours work meeting with the developers, studying drawings, cross-checking shadow diagrams and building models so that we may fully understand the design that has been proposed for this site. As you can imagine, we're not happy that such a large building can be built so close to our home, particularly that we had only ever imagined 2-storey townhouses on the site. And I've lived there for 25 years. Ever since I bought the place, I thought that something would probably be developed out the back one day. And as I said, I imagine it'd probably be 2-storey townhouses. The developer decided to take the proposal to VCAT with the hope that an outcome could be achieved at the initial compulsory conference. During the conference, and after considerable negotiation and consultation, they managed to modify the proposal to a point where we accept it. We believe this is a reasonable outcome for the community because it reduces the visual bulk and overshadowing to residential properties along Rennie Street and Cash Street, provides a community amenity in the form of a pocket park at the eastern end of the public walkway that extends through the site, and provide some traffic calming measures to Cash Street. I believe you've seen the drawings that Lachlan put up that show these areas. We now find ourselves in a position where we have to support this development. One of the things about these type of developments is the uncertainty of outcome. Council support for this proposal would remove one further level of uncertainty for us. We would much prefer to have this proposal given the green light rather than the developer take the proposal to the full hearing of VCAT, where nobody knows what the outcome will be. For the community and us, this will be back to square one, and we've come too far for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for articulating so clearly. Thank you. Yes, please.
My name's Polly Bastow. I live at 1 Cash Street. I just thought I should give some feedback to the council about the process, the planning process. The good things were that the developer did provide a liaison officer with the neighbours, and so it provided an outlet for us to discuss with the developer. The town planning, we thought Moreland planner Lachlan McGann understood the issues well and responded to our queries, and we appreciate that. And we also thank the councillors who came to our house and talked to us about it, much appreciated. The bad things about the process were that, using the equinox as an arbiter of what is reasonable shadow when dealing with an 8-storey building next to a single-storey building is simply wrong. We could lose 5 months of afternoon sunlight into our passive solar house with this development proposal, even though the building complies with the equinox standard for shadowing. This standard is not an appropriate measure of shadowing for big developments onto small-scale residential properties, and the state government needs to be lobbied to change this. If the developer builds a park in front of us, as negotiated, we will retain our morning and midday sunlight. Otherwise, frankly, our passive solar designed house would be cactus. The design to minimise energy usage, which is what is encouraged by this council, will be completely undermined. So we need to think about the shadowing standard much more. Developers also, I believe, should not be allowed to use previous planning applications on the site as precedents. The argument should not be that if residents accepted X amount of shadow, they should now accept Y amount of shadow. To say that a private open space is already theoretically shadowed for 3 months of the year does not mean that it's okay to shadow it for an additional 2 months with shadows that come deep into living spaces. Unless something is physically built on the site, I believe developers should not be allowed to use previous shadow diagrams from planning applications for a building that was never built as justification for shadowing for their new planning application. And I would like to put on record that I am concerned with the future traffic implications for Cash Street, even if the council engineering department isn't. And I'd like my 6 metre wide street to be closed in the middle to through traffic, if that can be arranged at a future date. Suggestions for making this process better. Moreland should insist that developers provide a physical model so that people can easily understand the proximity of their house to the development. With the new BIM, or not so new BIM drafting tools and 3D printing, this shouldn't be a huge impost. This would help everyone, residents, town planners, councillors, and indeed developers understand things faster. It could actually speed up the process. In fact, I made just Lego models of it, and it really pointed out the problems with the project really early. 3D renderings are easy to manipulate. The standard developer technique of putting improbably large trees and people drinking coffee to soften what is often a huge and unfriendly streetscape should be discouraged. If there is no deep soil planting or sufficient space or not enough sunlight, trees and people will not grow or linger in that space. Council should limit the amount of planning applications allowed for a particular site to, say, 1 or 2 applications every 10 years. It takes too much of an emotional toll on the neighbours to have more frequent applications allowable. Neighbours are collateral damage in the planning process, and more needs to be done to protect them from ongoing developer tyranny. In conclusion, we have managed to negotiate for the local community. 1, a pocket park open to all the community to be maintained at the developer's expense. The lack of parks has been noted in Moreland Council's parks close to home. And to gain another park in this area is a significant achievement. Further, we have a written agreement to allow some neighbours to have a say in the park layout, and this is to include deep soil planting for flowering gums and native flowering plants that will benefit local birds and bees. We also believe that this pocket park on Cash Street will help relieve the narrowness of Cash Street and provide greater safety to pedestrians. A reduction on building height. We have also achieved a reduction in building height, as discussed. Traffic calming measure paid for by the developer, subject to council approval, to help decrease the traffic issues on Cash Street. The developers, to their credit, were persuaded to move in a wall of an underground car park so that a flowering gum with a pair of yearly returning parrots at 5 Rennie Street can hopefully keep their nest. I am aware of the irony of now having to advocate for the development, and I'm frankly a little annoyed that I really have to. However, being a realist and one of the residents most affected by this development, we desperately want this development to be built so that the fate of our house can be settled. It's not an ideal development, but I believe what we have negotiated is a much improved result for the local and future residents, given the size of the site and under the current state planning scheme. As residents, we would like this application to be approved now rather than be plunged into the uncertainty of a full VCAT hearing and what may be lost in the process. I would also like to say just that I appreciate what was said about Cash, the Cash plumbing yard, because it is, I think, one of Moreland's oldest industrial structures, and it would be good if there was some recognition of it. It's quite magnificent at the moment, but we understand it's changing.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any other objectors that wish to speak? Is there a representative of the applicant? Oh, Did you want to speak? Is there an objector?
No, I'd like to speak for the
Okay, actually, I'll take that before I take Vaughan. Yes, please come. Submission, yeah.
Good evening. My
Good
name
evening.
is Margotata McRyan, and I live at number 2 Cash Street.
Yes.
I'm representing myself and my husband. We would like to. We are here to. Again, to support the above-named application in the form of the amended plans as a result of the VCAT compulsory conference on the 3rd of October 2018. Andrew and I, again, find ourselves in the position to support it because I think the outcome that has been negotiated is an improved outcome for our street. And these are on the basis of the following, that there is a provision for a traffic calming measure on Cash Street. We are deeply concerned about the amount of traffic, the speed of traffic on a narrow street. And the traffic calming measure is subject to approval of the council. However, if it goes ahead, it will significantly prevent vehicles travelling at high speeds. They will have to slow down and give the street a more pedestrian look. I think it's in keeping with the move to make it will have a positive effect on safety of pedestrians and encourage the use of public transport. Also, the provision of a pocket park is a great outcome for local residents, not just on our street, but also neighbouring streets, as parks are much needed in this area. The area desperately needs more parks and green spaces to balance the addition of new building, especially to a large scale as this development. The development is already including, it already includes a green space on the south side. The addition of a pocket park on Cash Street is a great achievement for the amenity of the local residents. We also believe that although the development it's a great development, however, the visual bulk has been reduced on Cash Street as well as on the billboard on Sydney Road. We would like the development to go ahead because it's the second, almost a third lots of plans submitted, and it would be good to have to go ahead and improve the street rather than have the uncertainty and go to a hearing, a VCAT hearing, where the outcome is
in question. Yeah.
Questionable. We don't know what the outcome is going to be.
Understand.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much for doing your presentation. Thank you so much. And Vaughan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and fellow councillors. My name is Vaughan Connor. I'm a Director of Contour Consultants. We're town planners who act for the permit applicant. I don't think I'll say much tonight other than we've worked really hard with council officers and with the objectors/submitters to get to the point where we're at. There are a number of quite significant concessions which have been made to get to that point, and significant concessions which will realise, public benefits. I'm happy to answer any questions about the background to it or the current plans, but I think I'll leave it at that. What I will say, though, in response to the first submitter is the project manager and I have had conversations about whether or not some of the heritage on the site can be salvaged and somehow incorporated into the public realm, and there's a commitment to do that. In relation to the public access, the gates shown on the plan are a hangover from previous plans, and there's a condition 1E, which requires the public access, and there's other conditions which deal with lighting and signage and the like as well. So, and we're not opposing any of those. In fact, we'll embrace those, and the walkway in the public realm is a really big element of the proposal. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, any questions for the applicant? Yes.
I'd just like to put the...
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you, Vaughan. Okay, a motion you'd like to put?
Yeah, I'd like to put the officer recommendation.
You want to second the officer recommendation? So, moved by Councillor Abood, seconded by Councillor Bolton. You may speak to it, Councillor Abood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to commend a few people. So Polly and Tony for, talking to me on the phone quite a while ago, but having Councillor Riley over to have a look at the model and have a long, in-depth discussion about the application, which was forwarded back to us. But also for being part of a group of 5 objectors who engaged by completing the statement of grounds and then engaging with the compulsory conference process, which has brought this outcome. I think it speaks very loudly to how flawed the situation is in terms of how the planning system works, where ultimately the design is left to the applicants, the project managers and the residents, because, and Hugh Lachlan as well, and council as well, because the system determines that these applications, even though they're huge and complex, have a limited time frame to be completed. And what we keep finding, and I'm sure it's happening more and more often, and I haven't had this confirmed, is that these applications are being called into VCAT, and what we're being offered is an amended plan through the chamber, which has really been resolved by the residents who initially objected. I'm pretty sure maybe only 2 times we've had objectors becoming submitters and actually supporting a plan in terms of, let this go through because we've negotiated this outcome rather than reverting back to what was initially planned. And so it's quite a remarkable situation, I find. I wanted to also mention that the Moreland Integrated Transport Strategy has recently closed for submissions, and we've started to hear some of those submissions and read through them. There is a fact sheet, and under cars and traffic we are identifying that there will be roads that we're looking to close just to only be able to carry local traffic. So I hope that maybe your road will be in consideration for something like that. And to you, Vaughan, and your project manager, I'd just like to commend the idea of protecting the heritage of the site, because the city is going through a great transition. And, your and my favourite historian sitting to my left here will tell you all you need to know about what's going on. And there are many people that are very interested in, the history and the heritage of this city, which, even though the whole state is quite young, goes deep. So I think that considering how much change is happening and how quickly it's happening, the idea of preserving some of those stories is really valuable. There's some great examples of where it's been done really well. So I'm looking forward to that being part of this development. But I really would like to commend your ability to work together to this outcome, which is something that I think most of us can really live with. And although the process is not perfect, I think the fact that we've got, the ratepayers and residents in this city are getting more and more au fait with the process of planning, and there's quite a lot of people who totally understand, building all the way through from drafting plans to what that will feel and look like. It's probably a good idea to mention Kwan, who's one of our local heroes inside the chamber, who's now being able to enable us to look at some of these applications in a 3D model through virtual reality, so we can really have a look at what we're going to be facing here. So thanks everybody, and this is what it is, and I'm happy to put it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Pooh. Councillor Bolton, would you like to speak to it?
Thanks. I am speaking in favour of this development application purely for the reasons that have been put forward by the submitters tonight. I think while, it is very welcome that the developer has been prepared to make some amendments to the plans, I still don't think it is a great development. I think, as well as the impact on Cash Street, on Rennie Street, because Rennie Street's not that big, and Cash Street definitely, when I've been visited, Cash Street is clearly used as a shortcut for people to get various places. So there is a lot of speeding traffic, but it's sort of when we don't have really great public transport, because it isn't great really, it's very overcrowded. We've got a real competition in this city, and especially as people are trying to develop solar-friendly houses and so forth, because there's many people in that boat. I welcome Polly's suggestions about about the planning laws, because the thing that helped residents in this case is the two worst affected people are trained architects who understood how to analyse the shadow drawings and picked up that there were mistakes in the shadow drawings, etc. And the reality is most residents will not have that level of knowledge and expertise to be able to do that, or the money to be able to employ somebody. So unless there are changes to the planning schemes, there'll be other situations like this where we won't be able to, where no, there won't be adequate mitigation and negotiated, because a lot of residents are not in a position to be able to negotiate this. So thank goodness it's great that you've been able to negotiate these changes, and I think, certainly it would be good if Moreland can be an advocate for some of the sorts of things that you're putting forward, especially this idea, the spring equinox being used as the point at which overshadowing is determined rather than the winter equinox. So I just think this is a disastrous situation for many residents. So anyway, I'll just leave it at that. I'd certainly like to see your presentation about these changes in writing.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Any other speakers? Councillor Rowley.
Just briefly, I think my thoughts have been echoed by the mover and seconder this evening, but I just really wanted to acknowledge the effort and the extent that people have gone to, and the hundreds of hours and the real efforts that you've gone to get to this point. It's not something we hear of that often, although I'm sure many people put many hours in and they never quite quantify it for us, and there's all of the angst and everything else that goes with it. So just to acknowledge that and to getting to this point, I'm more than happy to support this outcome this evening of the proposal because of all of that work and the negotiation, and it is a resolution. We have to be prepared to have acceptable outcomes at this committee. They're not always ideal or even high quality outcomes. We just have to have acceptable ones, and I think tonight is actually slightly better than acceptable, partly for the reasons that you've spoken to. Yes, we are getting to three-dimensional goggles and things where we're using this, and our council's leading the way with support of the state government. In terms of your comments and suggestions around our planning scheme, you've got 4 weeks to an election to actually get some of those issues on there for the candidates. And that's going to be an important aspect of what happens from here, because we are governed by what the state government sets down for us. So the more we can advocate and change those. I have to say the city on our southern boundary has already raised the issues around overshadowing, so there are things that I think we'll want to turn our minds to as councillors to try and improve what our residents have to go through. But having said that, I just want to commend everyone and thank you for all your efforts and appreciate your contributions this evening, and look forward to a better than acceptable outcome, particularly with the pedestrian links and that Pocket Park. They are really exceptional outcomes. We don't often get those kinds of outcomes, and to get all those setbacks and deep plantings, and I could go on. I won't leave it there, but thank you so much for all those things.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley. Any other speakers? Being no further speakers, I'm going to put it to a vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Lachlan, would you like to outline the next step?
Council will now advise the VCAT that it supports the mediated proposal, subject to the conditions contained in the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes the business that we have tonight. So, councillors, members of the gallery and our viewers live streaming at home, I declare the council meeting for planning and related matters closed at 7:54 p.m. Thank you and good night.
To make better bats and to actually make them for their style. So recently I was commissioned to make 5 cricket bats for the Pascoe Vale Headfield Cricket Club for their under-13s girls cricket team. And to see their faces when they were given the cricket bats was just brilliant. So what I'd really love to be able to do is to keep working with my local community, the local cricket clubs, particularly the women, and work to make great cricket bats.
My name's Leslie. I have been with Moreland Family Daycare as an educator for over 36 years, I think. Family Daycare is a wonderful organisation. We look after children in our own home, they blend in with the family, and it's fantastic.
I love Family
I can choose my own hours, very flexible. I've made wonderful friendships with lots of the families. I'm now looking after children of the children I used to care for. The children just growing and developing is a wonderful, wonderful experience for me every day. I'd recommend family daycare to anybody and everybody. Oh, where's my Scouty snuggle? Where's my Scouty snuggle? Can I have a Scouty snuggle? How's your tea party going?